I've worn a lot of labels in my life. Some I chose, some were handed to me. Some of them were useful, some of them felt limiting, but none of them have ever fully captured who I am. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. So today, we're not going to be talking about whether labels are good or bad. We're going to be asking a different question. What happens when we treat labels like they're a final definition instead of a living description? Most of us were given a cookie cutter template for how to live, love, and succeed. But what if you don't fit that mold? What if you're ready to live a little differently, even if that makes you the odd one out?
We're Nyla and Cole, two people questioning the systems, the stories, and the identities that shape us. From politics to pleasure, culture to connection, this is where taboo meets truth.
If you've ever felt like a black sheep, cycle breaker, or someone who doesn't quite fit the cookie cutter mold, then you're a deviant just like us. Labels, very useful. They're a great way to try to make sense of something very complex, very ambiguous, help us understand the world and our place in it. But they can also be very rigid and very limiting. Nyla, what are some labels that have been imposed on you?
Oh goodness, so many. Woman, brown, Pakistani, European, good girl, a good daughter, a wife, a mother. Oh my God, the list is endless, right?
Let's see, labels I've been given. I was born into labels like white and American. Growing up, I got labeled gifted and talented by my teacher, which I think also comes with a lot of baggage. In my adulthood, I've been labeled by my friends as ADHD. Pretty much was told I was ADHD by a lot of my close friends and housemates and got a diagnosis. So that's one of my new labels that I've been learning to incorporate into the whole Cole picture. It's no surprise that when any of these labels are assigned to us, they come with really heavy expectations or filled with a lot of judgment.
Yeah, honestly, some of them really screw us over as well. A good example is the whole divorced label, right? Like that carries, for me, a lot of cultural significance. I'm the first woman in my family, in my lineage, I think, to get a divorce, actually.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Little bit heavy, but also my bank judges me for it. So when I was transferring my mortgage after the divorce, yeah, they were quick to tell me that I was now a higher risk category as a divorced single mother, to add another one in there.
That is insane. Okay, so this is formalized judgment based on a label, an official label given to you by the bank.
Yeah. So there's like stereotypes around what kind of a risk category I now represent. And what's kind of screwed up about it is that the way that they stereotype a divorced single mother is like the opposite of what I represented at that time. They're probably thinking of somebody that's maybe a little bit helpless in a low income category, whereas actually me and my ex, we had like the exact opposite situation where I was the breadwinner and I was earning a pretty high salary at the time, and he was out of work, and yet I was the one slapped with the divorced single mother label.
That is some wild sexism at play.
Yeah, welcome to the systems that we exist within, right? These labels, yeah, they really screw us over sometimes.
Well, and then there's the labels that are just seeped in judgment. You and I have talked about the term childless for people who don't have children.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's like I'm supposed to pity you. It comes from a place of lack, right?
Right.
You must be so career obsessed and not have a heart to not want children. Some like moral projection in there of like selfishness or...
Yeah, the term childless, in the word itself, it's about what you're lacking, what you haven't achieved yet, what you haven't given the world, where you're falling short.
Right. Whereas like child-free is maybe a bit more of an accurate representation for a lot of people. It's autonomous. You choose it. It kind of reclaims your sense of agency around a big decision in your life, right?
The word freedom just connotes potential, possibilities, opportunities that might come when you're not busy with childcare, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing that has to be right or wrong, right? This is, I think, what happens when some of these labels are seeped in judgment, societally. It makes us feel better to like assign a right way and a wrong way. And this is just an example of it, right? Child-free versus childless.
Yeah.
It's essentially describing perhaps the same situation, but with two completely different lenses.
Totally. The big bummer about what happens when these labels get put on us is that we can actually internalize them and internalize all the negative connotations. There's this idea called labeling theory by Howard Becker. He actually talks about the theory in terms of when people in society are labeled deviant, which I think is very topical for you and I. But, like young people who are caught committing crimes, or young people who don't show up in school and they're loitering in the parking lot, they might be slapped with the label deviant, a bane on society, bad news. And it actually gets internalized. And you believe that you have no use in society, that you'll never amount to anything. And then it becomes this sort of destiny to be called a deviant. You end up just proving people right.
Yeah, I mean, I can really see how, particularly with young people, like, you would form an attachment to the way somebody sees you, right? Because it's almost like shaping a story of who you are. And that could be, this example of whether it's like a negative label, like you're just not good at concentrating at school. But equally, it could be, oh, yeah, she's the high achiever. And then you self-identify with these and you internalize it, right? And that becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because your brain's then helping you choose decisions and make choices that have a higher probability of you fulfilling that self-defined story.
Yeah, even when the label has a positive or negative connotation, especially like you say, as a young person who is just starting to ask those big questions of who am I, these things just start to fill in the blanks.
Oh my God, so many horrific flashbacks to high school.
Yeah, I mean, when we were all desperately trying to fit in and desperately trying to figure out who the heck any of us were. You were telling me before this call about your complicated relationship with the term POC, or person of color, and how that term has been imposed on you and been part of your identity as young as you can remember growing up in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of was born into this term, right? I was born in the
Right.
UK. Yeah, I wasn't in the in group, if you like. I grew up in fairly white environments where I was often the odd one out. So in many ways, I was reminded of it over and over, particularly when you're young, right? You're a teenager, you just want to fit in. And I'm surrounded by the fact that I can't fit in for a very obvious reason, like my skin and my culture and my language and everything about me that's different. But the thing that I have struggled with the term over time is that it really flattens your identity into focusing on the negative disadvantage, right? So what the label does is it really describes your identity in a way that singularly comes down to the negative disadvantage, right? So it doesn't appreciate all of the richness that comes with being who I am, irrespective of whether that is, an in-group or an out-group dynamic. Actually, my own culture, my Pakistani culture, my language, my mother tongue, all of the nuances of my identity, also about growing up in a different country, that all adds so much richness to my identity. And that all gets lost in this kind of descriptor, if you like. It's really minimizing, and it doesn't celebrate any of the beautiful things, and it focuses everything on the disadvantage.
Which is, of course, important politically to highlight that disadvantage. I mean, I think the term POC is a powerful and important one to describe the experience of non-white people in a majority white place. The label has a utility, but it's specifically to describe disadvantage. And, we're talking about labeling theory, how we can wear these terms. It's the double-edged sword of the utility of these labels.
Exactly. And I think that's why I have a complicated relationship with it, right? As somebody who identifies as a person of color, identifies with this label, I live the reality of that disadvantage. And I think sometimes until you step into those shoes, you can't really appreciate what that systemic inequity looks like, because you don't live it every day the way I do. You're not reminded of it every day. And so what happens is that you almost can become not fixated, but like your lens can become really dominated by seeing the disadvantage of the descriptor of the label. And you yourself can forget to celebrate all of the different angles and the different edges and the things that are beautiful and worth embracing about this wonderful and different and unique cultural identity that you have. And so it has its place. And of course, the gravity of what it represents is not something to be minimized. And I would never want to minimize that. But equally, I want to not be diminished into just like a single narrative about what being a person of color represents.
Yeah.
Does that make
It
sense?
totally. My mind just went to Bad Bunny's Super Bowl show,
Oh, yeah.
which was, I'm going to say it, I think it's the greatest Super Bowl show of all time. I said it. And it opens with someone proclaiming, Que rico ser Latino, how wonderful it is to be Latino. And that's the
Mm,
theme of the entire show. And so right off the bat, it's saying this is about identity. And then the whole show is just this celebration of Latino identity. But I mean,
yeah.
obviously, it was also very political because to be Latinx in United States right now is to live in fear, to be othered, to not be sure when your race or identity is going to be used against you, to um,
Yeah.
to be told in all sorts of ways that you don't belong. But Bad Bunny
Mm,
responded to that with joy around the Latin identity.
yeah.
So he politicized the joy of an identity and the diversity within Latino identities across all the Americas. And I just love the fact that you can very much tap into a political power of an identity through the joy of it too. To me, it's the perfect response.
Yeah, and in many ways, it's like a beautiful rebellion, right? Like, if
Mm,
everything we're supposed to feel as brown people right now, like that still stands, but also there are all these beautiful things. Let's just remember who we are as a people. Let's remember all the gorgeous things that we're defending. Let's remember what this culture is full of, is rich with. It's a beautiful response of love and joy in the face of
mm.
like a lot of hate right now.
It's the perfect rebuttal to being told you're not welcome and to being reduced
Mm.
to being told you're an unwelcome minority.
Yeah, I love
Mm,
it. And it's like pride in it as well, right? This
yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that these labels, they don't just describe us. What's often happening is that we're trying to fit in to belong rather than just noticing that we deserve to be accepted with the beautiful cultures that we have as we are. We don't have to diminish those or edit ourselves to fit somebody else's definition of, what it means to belong here.
That's it. So Bad Bunny chose to proclaim his Latino identity from the rooftops, literally from the rooftop of his casita during the show. We all have freedom to choose labels for ourselves. It's about self-expression, identity, visibility, finding community. And there's so much power in the
Mm.
specific words we choose to describe ourselves, even in the nuance from one label or another.
Yeah.
It can completely change not just how others perceive you, but how you perceive yourself. I mean, what are some of the labels that you have embraced for yourself or chosen for yourself?
Yeah, there are definitely some labels that I have that I kind of reel against, right? And the whole motherhood piece is one of these things that I've been unpacking because since splitting with my ex, like I am technically a divorced single mother according to my bank.
Mm-hmm.
But I choose to go by co-parent rather than single mother because similarly to what we've been saying, like the single mother is just this focus on this struggle narrative. I'm supposed to be like
Huh.
this person you should pity and feel sorry for.
The
And
hardscrabble single mother who's just trying to make ends meet.
right?
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
true. Yep.
Yeah, like think of the picture in your mind when you hear the word single mother. Like, even if I use those ever to describe myself, it's like in moments of self pity or like in moments where I feel really down on myself. But actually, I choose to use the word co parent because there's some intentionality around the partnership that I have with my co parent around how we choose to raise our son. And there is actually it's the same reality. It's just a completely different way of defining a label for yourself. And for
Mm.
me, it's about feeling like there's one way to parent a child or be a mother,
Be a
right?
mom, yeah.
Actually, that's what I'm really railing against, this idea of like there is one way to be a mom. And that for me, like there is stuff to unpack both on a societal level, in the UK around like how mothers are supposed to show up and how that's supposed to fit alongside your own individual dreams and identities and desires in life, whether you are still a sexual person or not, whether you still
Mm.
deserve to have dreams and a career and ideas of what impact you could have in the world outside of being a mother. But also it has a huge cultural baggage as well, because in many ways I'm also like one of the first in my lineage and my generation to be balancing both being a mother and having my own personal identity outside of being a mother. And the co-part of co-parenting makes that possible, right? Because I'm a part-time parent and I'm very fulfilled by that role. Maybe when I'm not with my son, I'm supposed to be, in tears and struggling to get by because I just miss him so much. And I love my son more than anything in this world. But actually, I don't miss him when he's not with me. I think he's having a great time with his dad. And I am a fulfilled person following my other dreams and doing things that really enrich my life outside of motherhood. And I think that's quite a deviant expression of motherhood because it's not what people are comfortable with often.
Totally. I mean, what I also really like about it is it shows that it is one part of who you are. It's a dimension of how you spend your days, but it is not your whole identity, right?
Yeah.
You don't let the label take over your whole life. You're reclaiming the fact that you contain multitudes by being a parent sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think, talking about being child-free versus childless earlier, like society seems to have really strong opinions on motherhood and parenthood in general.
Yes.
Right? What's an example for you of where identity seems to come with some kind of behavioral rules of how you're supposed to show up?
Yeah, I think an example for me is the word queer. I think gay is perfectly fine as a descriptor, but I love the word queer. For one thing, the term itself has been fluid for decades. I mean, it started as this insult, it was derogatory, and now it's come to be pretty cool. I think it can sort of describe a counterculture, the countercultural vibes of being LGBT. But what I love about it is the inherent, openness and ambiguity. Because, I'm going to kiss who I want.
Yeah, you are.
And queer means I could still kiss a beautiful woman someday or tonight. Because, sexuality evolves and what we want in our sex lives and love lives evolves. And the label queer gives me that, just gives me that flexibility and that freedom. And so I wear that one proudly.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how you identify with a label that even by definition, it's like a reclaiming. And so there's a disruptive force in the intention behind like the queer label, right? But then, there's almost like this ingrained capacity within us that we then want to like define the edges of it so that we start to become even more rigid within something that's trying to be a disruptive force.
Oh my gosh. And you know what? Queerness is unfortunately a really good example of that too, because I think all of us want to feel like we're part of a community, that we fit in, that we belong. And then a label we can imbue it with expectations of good enough, queer enough,
right,
cool enough. Well, you've told me yourself. I don't want to call you out, but you've told me when we weren't recording that you weren't sure if you were allowed to call yourself queer.
Yeah. I mean, let me just come in here.
Please.
So I must say, like, the queer label is one that I struggle to self-identify with, even though I think it fits actually for me. Partly, I just don't know if I'm a legit queer person, I'm very feminine presenting. Like, is that like really judgmental of me to assume that I have to present a certain way to be queer, or I have to be like radical in some way? I mean, I just don't know if it's okay for someone like me to call herself queer. And I think that's my slight discomfort with it, even though rationally I can understand that this is about fluidity in my sexual expression, right? And it doesn't have to be any one definition of that. And yet here I am still feeling a little bit uncomfortable about whether I'm legit queer or not.
Well, I mean, I've got a friend who is very sexually attracted to women, but she hasn't acted on it, and she doesn't feel like she's earned, quote unquote, the term queer. Yeah, and I mean, I just find that really disheartening because it's like suddenly these labels have these gatekeepers, or you've both sort of felt like there's some gatekeeping to these labels. And it just sucks when a label that's supposed to be liberating ends up coming along with really specific expectations and boundaries and norms.
Yeah. I think that the beautiful thing about labels connected to our sexuality, especially if you're exploring and unpacking that, is that actually what I have realized, and I know a lot of people around me notice about this kind of exploration of yourself, is that it's very fluid and you're not any which way. And sometimes, you find yourself on apps and things being like, I'm not sure any of these fit me. Maybe all of them fit me to some degree, right? I can't select them all.
Maybe one
But
fits you today and it won't fit you next week.
exactly. That's the whole point, right? Is that actually we are, again, it's the whole thing of we are multitudes, but the idea that even our sexuality needs to be labeled, like, how bisexual are you? Are you more heterosexual than bisexual? Are you heteroflexible? Are you bi-curious? Have you acted on it? Has your expression of performing it qualified you to claim the label? That's what it becomes about, right? Are you performing it or are you actually it?
I know someone who's a straight identifying woman, and she didn't think it was proper for a bisexual woman to be president of an LGBT organization because this bisexual woman was dating a man and, quote, hadn't suffered enough. Uh,
Oh my God, what?
so yeah, this idea that you have to prove, you earn a label through
Ay,
suffering and
ay.
hardship.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're deemed to have suffered through it enough, you can be branded. This, I mean, come on.
Come on, people. These are all the ways we
LGBTQ,
can't help ourselves.
yeah, labels are supposed to be creating community rather
Right.
than
But actually, what you're
the.
getting is tribalism. It's like in many
Mm,
ways, it's this whole in group, out group thing. You get the community, tick for the good stuff. But then when you're in your community, then you're looking out at everybody else being like, well, you're not in. And that's the part that we just don't need, right?
yeah, you mentioned high school, trying to fit in, trying to figure out who we are. Um,
Mm.
I think we also carry that with us when we grow up, and we still constantly look for groups to fit in with. And a lot of the time, when we find it, we can get very tribal and exclusive, and we like to be king of the hill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what Brene Brown talks about with this whole idea of like belonging versus fitting in, right? Like how you start to perform your identity to remain legitimate in that group because you've ended up there because you feel seen there. But now somehow there are different parts of it that you start to perform rather than continue to kind of self define, if you like.
Yeah, and it's I think communities are great to belong in, but when you feel like you've got to fit in, you've got to like adapt and conform to fit in, to prove yourself,
Mm.
then it's actually the opposite of belonging, right?
Oh my God, story of my life.
Mm. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the time, labels stop being just descriptors and they start being scripts for how to fit
Mm.
in with the groups we want to belong in. They don't just describe us, they train us for what's good enough to fit in. How do we edit
Mm.
ourselves to be part of this community, to be the best version of this label that we can be, which is the exact opposite of finding belonging through a label and a community.
Yeah, and I also wonder if, I think about how when we're in growth spaces, actually, we're often outside of our comfort zone, right? So there's like some discomfort. I often think about like when I feel discomfort, there's something for me to grow into there, or there's like
Hmm.
something to learn. And I'm thinking about how that fits with labels, because labels also age, they get old. Even something as disruptive as the queer label, like it
Yep.
goes through a process of aging a little bit. And if we don't evolve those labels as we evolve the ways we identify with those labels, that's when they start to feel like outdated.
Yeah.
And maybe that's my discomfort with the queer label, is that my perception of that label is outdated now. And actually, I am also queer. I just don't associate the way that I express myself as also fitting with, the old definition that I'm holding on to.
Carl Rogers, you introduced me to his thinking of
Uh-huh.
self concept versus organismic self, which is a very fancy way of saying a lot of us, once we decide the communities we want to be a part of, we then have an aspirational self that we're trying to conform to. We're
Mm.
like, I need to be this kind of queer. I need to be this kind of feminist. I need to be this kind of mother. I need to be this kind of person of color.
Mm.
And then we are sort of chasing that target of that sense of self and maybe abandoning who we actually are a lot of the time because
Yeah.
we're paving over all the different shapes this label can take and this identity can take, and we get really hung up
Yeah.
on that conformity.
Yeah, I think the thing that really resonates for me with what Carl Rogers says is very much about like evolution, right? And like holding on to rigid definitions of these labels, even when the labels themselves are trying to be disruptive. Like
Right.
there's a pattern that we're just repeating even after we disrupt. And actually, what does it look like to have the freedom to keep evolving and to keep updating your own identity, maybe we can take flavors of all of the different parts of our identities, and we can feel a part of lots of different labels rather than needing to rigidly show up as, a person of color in a certain way, or a feminist in one way, or a mother in only one way, like
Hmm.
what are the stories in our heads about like how that should be? It's that should voice versus the life we're living, right? How can we just evolve this?
I mean, what we're talking about is intersectionality. And I mean, the term intersectionality, we hear it loads, but I feel like a lot of the time when we talk about intersectionality, it has like a complication. It's like, well, we need to make room for all these different types of this label. We need to make sure there's space, which is absolutely true. But then what we don't talk about is how each of those different versions of this label adds so much to just the breadth of this community, the ability of a community and a label itself to evolve. I mean, there's this
Yeah.
alchemy that happens when there's all these different Venn diagrams of labels, and you have so many different versions of queer people in a queer space. You have so many different versions of people of color all coming together in community. That's actually what keeps the label vital and urgent and growing. And
Mm.
I think we overlook the fact that that keeps these labels from getting stale. Am I making any
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, actually, I like that. It's making me think about how rigid my own definitions are of different labels, right? And actually,
Hmm.
what does it mean to be at the edges of a label? And like,
Hmm.
how could I use them as like approximations rather than, you said it earlier, like they're descriptors, they're not like scripts or prescriptions
Yep.
for how we should be. So
Hmm.
if I'm allowed to use the labels to like find myself in many ways and like find a sense of belonging to others who get me, then how can I also use them as ways of like evolving my thinking of what does it mean to show up with a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and embrace the intersectionality of all of the things I am, which includes lots of internal tensions between them, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, labels should be a jumping off point. It should be a place
yeah.
of beginning to understand who you are and to kickstart where you're going. There's that struggle of whether we wear a label or we let the label wear us. I think a lot of times we get it backwards.
Yeah, I do relate to all of these labels differently to my parents, and maybe my son will relate to them differently to how I relate to them. And so there's something quite nice about that story continuing to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, labels are allowed to evolve too. The way language evolves,
Mm,
I think when community becomes conformity, it really bums me out. And I think it especially happens when we don't celebrate intersectionality.
right.
I open Instagram and I'll see these photos of like 12 white gay guys, and they've all got the exact same haircut and the exact same build and same beard and same fashion. And man, it
They
gives
need a
me the ick.
stylist.
Well, and they need some diversity, like not just for the sake of it, but just like they've all
Yeah.
forgotten that they're allowed to be their own individual people. They've forgotten they're all allowed to be their own
Yeah.
version of gay,
Yeah.
because they've just become this Xerox copy of each other. And I will
Mm,
run away from any sort of social interactions like that or groups like that because it's the diversity that tells all of us that we're allowed to be
mm.
unique and self-expressive. So thank God for diverse spaces. We need intersectionality, is really what I'm saying, to keep all of these identities evolving and growing and changing.
Yeah. In order for things to evolve, there has to be something different. There has to be some kind of internal contradiction going on, right? That's kind of how we grow from a space. Also, the discomfort of that causing some friction is a good thing. And so
Yeah.
maybe we need to start just like being with some of that friction and just like noticing it rather than wanting it to always go away, you know?
Well, it's also just you're giving a gift to the rest of us. My God. Like I seek out that friction. Those are the spaces I want to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably says something about you and I. We gravitate toward diversity. We gravitate toward people who are different to us, and we look for people who live differently. And actually, that's a huge source of inspiration and admiration for us. But actually, a lot of people live their lives wanting to be around conformity and sameness in many ways because I guess it's safe. It feels safe. And if you haven't felt
It
safe
does.
before, maybe you value that highly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about why that feels good for somebody. And I think it's probably connected to a little bit of, tribal belonging dynamics in human dynamics, and also like moral legitimacy, as religion and things like that are kind of fading out as significant drivers of our societal norms. Maybe some of these other labels start to take that space instead and take that role instead.
I hear that. I mean, we all want to feel safe, comfortable. We all want to feel like we belong. But I mean, you and I, on paper, we've got nothing in common. But like,
right?
I guess we met through work, but
I
you're
know,
my
but I
people.
almost feel offended to say that.
I know, right? It's dirty
It
W word.
seems
But
so
like,
wrong.
but I mean, you and I connected and became friends, not because we were like pursuing people with our own labels. We weren't like going out label matching because we don't have a lot of labels that match.
Mm.
The way we grew up is different. The way we live our
We
lives is
probably couldn't be
different.
more different, actually.
Honestly, but you're my people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just feel sad for people who choose
Mm.
to they make the boundaries of their lives based on the labels they wear, because that's
Yeah.
so limiting.
It also explains why sometimes the people closest to you can feel the furthest away, right?
Mm.
I feel
Mm.
like actually the people on paper who seem to be or who might be the closest to me are actually the people who understand me the least.
Yep, I can relate to that 100%.
Yeah. And I also just think it's a wonderfully mind expanding exercise to have a conversation with somebody who's living off script, right? Because we've
Oh yeah.
all chosen these unique paths. And that's the beautiful thing about life is that actually we are all such unique individuals. We've had different journeys and stories to get here. And whilst Instagram may have us believe that we can all compare ourselves to each other and compare our
Mm.
success and our paths to each other, we're so unique and we can't be compared.
I think the fact that we all have different labels means there is no script. That
Yeah,
it's not about rejecting any of them, but it's just about knowing that we're, of course, greater than the sum of our parts, you know?
exactly. Yeah, and I think, there's a part of me that really sits with this question, who are you?
Well, I've given up asking myself that, honestly. I I think I spent enough of my youth trying to answer that question, and then I realized like it's like a dog chasing its tail. But well, so maybe head towards a conclusion. Neither of us is knocking the power and the force of a label. We know that it's one of the most potent forces for visibility, for connecting with
Hmm.
yourself, for connecting with others, for being seen and heard. I mean, these
Yeah,
things have
and it's thought
have
provoking.
oh yeah, and just help us understand the world and all its complexities.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean labels can't evolve, and it doesn't mean we can't evolve with them or beyond
Yeah,
them.
totally. Yeah, I do a lot of work in my private practice as well with people who are exploring what life looks like for them when they're not wearing their labels, right? When they're not performing them and they can take the mask off and actually, what is their real view of themselves? What is their real understanding of who they are?
Hmm.
And I think that comes to some closing questions, really, that I would love our listeners to reflect on with us. Where are you still growing beyond a word that once really felt comforting to you? A label that really felt comforting to you. Which label feels like home for you and which just feels like pressure?
I love that question because labels are, I mean, we're supposed to find home and community and belonging when we self-identify with something. It's not supposed to feel like undue pressures, expectations,
Yeah, right?
shortcomings.
Exactly. And if no one was watching and no one was judging you, how would you self-identify? How would you define yourself? What would be the labels that you would choose? I
Hmm.
think there's like quite a freeing thought to think about that because sometimes we don't even realize we've been slapped with a bunch of labels that we didn't choose for ourselves.
Yeah, and what happens when we can actually separate identity from performance? I think
Mm,
that's it's huge to think about.
mm-hmm. Yeah, probably a bunch of that is subconscious as well.
Yep.
Well, I think those are some really great reflections just to think about how labels are evolving, how that continues to help you evolve the chapters in your own story too.
Hmm. Well put. Oh, well, thank you, Nyla. My head is swimming, but mostly I just want an ice cream.
Yeah, I know, me too. On that
Well,
note,
everyone, three labels that Nyla and I have embraced with gusto, and we invite you to do the same. Stay curious, stay kind, and absolutely stay deviant.
oh yeah. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Till next time.